Hello again, and welcome to another Psalm in the Palm. Today we're finishing up Psalm 139. This is our third video, but it's packed with so much information. The first few verses spoke about how God knows not only everything, but God knows us. God knows us intimately. And then he went on to share that there's no place where we can hide from God. And that can be a terror to us, because if we want to run from God, if we want to hide our sin or shame from God, there's no place where we can go. But there's also no place where we can go where he isn't there to help us and aid us and come to us in our time of need. And that's what we need to focus on. God loves you. God knows you. God knows all about you. There's nothing you can hide from him. And yet he is reaching out to you. He is calling out to you. Are you willing to put your faith and trust in him? We're going to finish up continuing with verse 17. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, men of bloodshed, for they speak against you wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. Again, so many things he mentions here. First, the preciousness of God's thoughts to him. He understands and acknowledges that despite the fact that this God knows all things, that he is the God of the universe, that not only is he intimately acquainted with all the details of his life, but he is continually thinking of him, and his thoughts toward him are precious, and he acknowledges that. He says that they are so many that I couldn't count them. And God's presence is always there with him, even when he doesn't know it, when he doesn't acknowledge it. That doesn't take away God's presence. And I want you to think about that. God knows you intimately, and whether you deny God's existence or not, whether you feel God's presence or not, God is always there. God doesn't stop being God at any point in time. He's continually there to watch over you. He's continually there to call out to you when you're straying from him, when you're running in the other direction, when you're convinced that he doesn't exist because you want to do what you want to do, or you think there's a better idea out there. And when that better idea fails, God is always there for you to turn to and to put your faith and trust in. We need to consider that. We need to think about that. When you are in a relationship with God and circumstances seem to, the world is collapsing all around you, and it seems like God's nowhere to be found. He hasn't left you. He's still thinking about you. Even though you don't sense his presence, that doesn't mean that he's not working. I think of the next few verses, and it ties into something we've talked about before, but it's a little bit different. We've talked about the psalmist in his anger, in his frustration, asking God to destroy his enemies, to wipe them out, to diminish them, to make their children orphans. And some of the language is very strong and very harsh. And we talked about how the psalmist there is just sharing his heart, but this is a little bit different, because he says, God, they're not my enemies. They're people who have rejected you. They're people who hate you. They're people who despise your name. And because of that, I despise them. I think that's a step better, but it's still not where we should be. But again, the psalmist there is reflecting his heart, his love for God, and his acknowledgement of God's care for him, wants to align with God. So if God has enemies, those enemies are his enemies. He wants to focus on God's standard. God might look at that equation just a little bit differently, but that's not part of, again, here the psalmist is sharing his heart, his desire, and he wants to align himself with God because God knows him so well, because God is always there in his time of need. God never goes away. When he sleeps, he wakes up, God's still there. He's going to understand and know that. And then the end of the psalm is very, very important for us, because I want to go back to the very beginning. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. God is a searcher of hearts. He is always searching. He is always seeing. He is always knowing. But here it ends with the psalmist saying, search me, O God. You have searched me and know me already, but God, I want to invite you to continue to be engaged in my life. Know my heart. Know my anxious thoughts. And if there's a wicked way in me, deal with that, Lord. See if there's any wicked way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. Lord, I have a tendency to go my own way. I have a tendency to have my own anxious thoughts. And if my thinking is messed up, if my heart's in the wrong place, God, I want you to search that, and I want you to point me back in the right direction. What an important prayer for all of us, because our understanding is limited. Our view of the world around us and the people around us is limited. And we might go quick to judgment, or we might be less prone to judge our motives and our intentions than we should. Here the psalmist is inviting God, saying, God, you know me already. You've searched me already. Continue that process and change me to make me the person that you want me to be. We need to understand that that's where all of our hearts need to be. I pray that we would be bold enough to say those words to God, and that we would be willing to see what's wrong and ugly in our lives and be willing to change. God bless, and we'll talk again soon.